The invisible janitor. Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway of the Pentagon, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished floor. At 62 years old, she had been cleaning these same corridors for nearly 15 years, yet most people looked right through her as if she were part of the furniture. The morning rush was always the same. Officers in crisp uniforms strode past her with purpose, their conversations filled with important-sounding words about missions and briefings. Civilian workers hurried by, clutching coffee cups and folders, their eyes fixed on their phones or the path ahead. Nobody ever made eye contact with Maria. Nobody ever said good morning. She was simply invisible. Maria didn't mind the invisibility as much as she once did. It had taken years to build up the thick skin that protected her from the daily reminders that she didn't matter to most people in this building. She found comfort in her routine, in the familiar weight of her supplies, and in the satisfaction of leaving each space cleaner than she found it. Her shift started at 5 in the morning, when the building was mostly empty except for security guards and a few early arrivals. She preferred these quiet hours when she could work without dodging foot traffic or enduring the occasional impatient sigh when someone had to step around her cart. The early morning light filtering through the tall windows created patterns on the floor that reminded her of the cathedral she attended every Sunday. Maria had immigrated to the United States from El Salvador 30 years ago with nothing but hope and determination. She spoke broken English then, and though it had improved over the decades, she still felt self-conscious about her accent. This insecurity made her even more invisible, as she rarely spoke unless absolutely necessary. She remembered her first day at the Pentagon vividly. The security clearance process had taken months, and she felt proud to be working in such an important place. Her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, had shown her around quickly, explaining that discretion was paramount. "You'll see and hear things," Mrs. Henderson had said sternly, "but you remember nothing, understand nothing, and say nothing to anyone outside these walls." Maria had nodded eagerly, grateful for the opportunity. The job paid better than her previous cleaning positions, and the benefits would help her support her daughter Rosa, who was studying nursing at the community college. Every dollar Maria earned brought Rosa closer to her dream of becoming a registered nurse. Over the years, Maria had indeed seen and heard things. She had cleaned conference rooms where maps-covered tables and serious-faced people discussed operations in distant countries. She had emptied trash cans filled with shredded documents and sanitized surfaces where top-secret briefings had taken place. But true to her word, she remembered nothing, understood nothing, and said nothing. The invisibility that hurt most wasn't from the high-ranking officials or busy administrators. It came from her fellow service workers. During lunch breaks in the staff cafeteria, conversations would flow around her in languages she didn't understand, or in rapid English that excluded her. Even among her own people, she felt like an outsider. There was one exception to the rule of invisibility. Sergeant Michael Torres, a young man from Puerto Rico who worked in communications, always greeted her warmly in Spanish. His friendly, "Buenos dias, Señora Maria," never failed to bring a smile to her face. He would sometimes ask about her daughter or comment on the weather, treating her like a person rather than a cleaning appliance. On this particular Tuesday morning, Maria noticed unusual activity in the building. More uniforms than usual filled the hallways, and there seemed to be an air of anticipation that she couldn't quite identify. Security personnel were more alert, and several conference rooms that were normally used for routine meetings had been cleared and specially prepared. As she cleaned the third-floor restroom, Maria overheard two junior officers talking excitedly about a visit from someone important. "4 stars," one said to the other. "Can you believe it? General Morrison himself is coming to review our operations." The other officer whistled low. "That's a big deal. Word is he's considering our department for some special assignment." Maria continued her work, filing the information away as unimportant background noise. Generals and important visitors came and went regularly in this building. It rarely affected her daily routine except for occasional requests to ensure certain areas were especially spotless. By 10 o'clock, Maria had finished the restrooms and was moving on to the conference rooms on the fourth floor. As she approached Conference Room 4C, she noticed it was being prepared for something special. The usual long table had been replaced with a more formal setup, and small American flags adorned the corners of the room. Fresh flowers sat in the center of the table, and the windows had been cleaned to a spotless shine. While polishing the already clean conference table, Maria's mind wandered to her daughter Rosa. Last night, Rosa had called with exciting news about her clinical rotations at the local hospital. She was excelling in her studies, and had even caught the attention of the head nurse in the cardiac unit. Maria felt a surge of pride thinking about how far Rosa had come. Unlike her mother, Rosa spoke perfect English and carried herself with confidence that Maria had never possessed. The generational difference between Maria and Rosa sometimes created a small gap in their relationship. Rosa was grateful for her mother's sacrifices, but didn't fully understand the daily humiliations that came with being invisible. She encouraged Maria to speak up more, to demand respect, but Maria had learned long ago that keeping her head down was safer and more practical. As Maria worked, she thought about the conversation she'd had with Rosa the previous evening. Rosa had mentioned meeting a veteran at the hospital who had told her stories about his military service. "Mama," Rosa had said, "he told me about all the people who work behind the scenes to keep our military running. He said everyone matters. From the generals to the people who keep the buildings clean. I thought of you when he said that." Maria had smiled at her daughter's words, but privately wondered if the veteran was just being kind. In her experience, the people who kept the buildings clean were rarely acknowledged as mattering to anyone. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm. Maria methodically moved from room to room, her trained eye catching every spot that needed attention. She had developed an efficient system over the years, maximizing her time while ensuring nothing was overlooked. Her supervisors had never had cause to complain about her work, though they rarely offered praise either. Around 11:30, Maria was cleaning the executive washroom on the 5th floor when she heard a commotion in the hallway. Voices were speaking in urgent, hushed tones, and she could hear the quick footsteps of several people moving with purpose. Through the small window in the washroom door, she glimpsed uniformed figures gathering near the elevator bank. The activity seemed to center around someone's arrival, though Maria couldn't see who from her position. She finished her work quickly, not wanting to interfere with whatever important business was taking place. As she prepared to move her cart to a less conspicuous location, she heard Mrs. Henderson's voice calling her name. "Maria! Maria Santos!" Mrs. Henderson appeared around the corner, slightly out of breath and looking uncharacteristically flustered. "There you are. I need you to make sure Conference Room 4C is absolutely perfect. We have a very important visitor, and the meeting is starting in 20 minutes. Maria nodded and began pushing her cart toward the service elevator. She had already cleaned Conference Room 4C that morning, but she understood the need for extra attention when important visitors arrived. As she waited for the elevator, she could hear the main elevator arriving on the floor above, followed by the sound of many feet moving in formation. The service elevator arrived, and Maria rode down to the 4th floor, her mind focused on the task ahead. She would need to do a final check of Conference Room 4C, ensure the water glasses were filled, and verify that every surface was spotless. It was routine work, but she took pride in doing it well. As the elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, Maria stepped out into a hallway that was busier than she had ever seen it. Military personnel lined the corridor, standing at attention. The energy in the building had shifted dramatically since her early morning arrival, and she could sense that whatever was happening was truly significant. Maria pushed her cart toward Conference Room 4C, keeping close to the wall to stay out of the way of the important people, who were clearly preparing for something momentous. She had no idea that in just a few minutes, her invisible life was about to change forever. The moment of recognition. Maria entered Conference Room 4C and immediately began her final inspection. She adjusted the already perfect placement of water glasses, wiped down surfaces that were already spotless, and straightened chairs that were already aligned. The room smelled of lemon polish and fresh flowers, and the afternoon sunlight streaming through the clean windows created an atmosphere of importance that even Maria could feel. As she worked, voices in the hallway grew louder and more distinct. She could hear someone giving instructions about timing and protocol. Through the conference room's glass panels, she caught glimpses of uniforms with more decorations than she typically saw, suggesting that today's visitor was indeed someone of extraordinary importance. Maria was just finishing her inspection when the conference room door opened unexpectedly. A colonel she didn't recognize stepped in, followed by several other officers. "This will work perfectly," the colonel said to his companions. "The general should be comfortable here for the briefing." Realizing she was in the way, Maria quickly gathered her supplies and began moving toward the door. "Excuse me," she said quietly in her accented English, trying to make herself even smaller as she passed the group of officers. They stepped aside politely, but otherwise paid her no attention. She was invisible again, exactly as expected. As Maria exited the conference room with her cart, she found herself in a hallway that had been transformed. Military personnel stood in precise formations along both walls. The carpet had been marked with tape to indicate where people should stand, and security personnel were stationed at strategic points throughout the corridor. Maria realized she was caught in the middle of something significant. Her usual route to the service elevator would take her directly through what appeared to be a formal reception area. She hesitated, unsure whether to proceed or wait until the important business had concluded. Before she could decide, Mrs. Henderson appeared again, this time accompanied by a major whom Maria recognized from previous encounters. "Maria," Mrs. Henderson said quietly, "you need to move your cart out of the main hallway. Use the side corridor to reach the service area." As Maria began maneuvering her cart toward the indicated side corridor, she heard the distinct sound of the main elevator arriving. The hallway immediately fell silent, and every person present snapped to attention with military precision. Even Maria found herself standing straighter, responding instinctively to the sudden change in atmosphere. The elevator doors opened, and Maria caught her first glimpse of General Morrison. He was a tall man with silver hair and a bearing that commanded immediate respect. His uniform was adorned with ribbons and insignia that spoke of decades of distinguished service. Even from her position near the side corridor, Maria could sense the authority and presence that surrounded him. General Morrison stepped out of the elevator, followed by his aide and several other high-ranking officers. The hallway remained in respectful silence as the general acknowledged the assembled personnel with a brief nod. Maria watched from her peripheral position, fascinated despite herself by the ceremony and precision of the military protocol she was witnessing. As the general began moving down the hallway toward Conference Room 4C, his eyes swept the area with the keen observation of someone accustomed to noticing details. His gaze briefly touched on each of the officers standing at attention, acknowledging their presence with the subtle recognition that comes from years of military experience. Then something unexpected happened. General Morrison's stride slowed slightly, and his attention seemed to focus on something that had caught his eye. Maria, still positioned near the side corridor with her cleaning cart, suddenly realized that the general was looking directly at her. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Maria had spent 15 years being invisible in this building, and now one of the most important military leaders in the country was not only seeing her, but studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She lowered her eyes respectfully. assuming that her presence was somehow inappropriate and that she would be quietly removed from the area. But General Morrison didn't signal for her removal. Instead, he stopped walking entirely. The entire formal procession came to a halt as the general's attention remained fixed on Maria. The assembled officers maintained their positions, but Maria could sense their confusion about the unexpected pause in the proceedings. "Excuse me?" General Morrison said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hallway. Maria looked up, thinking he was addressing someone else, but found his eyes still focused on her. "You're Maria Santos, aren't you?" The question hit Maria like a physical shock. How could this important man possibly know her name? In 15 years of working in this building, no one above the level of supervisor had ever known who she was. She stood frozen, uncertain whether she was supposed to respond or remain silent. "Yes, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands gripped the handle of her cleaning cart as if it might anchor her to something familiar in this suddenly surreal situation. General Morrison stepped away from his formal procession and began walking directly toward Maria. Every person in the hallway watched in stunned silence as the four-star general approached the cleaning lady whom most of them had never really noticed. The breach of protocol was so unexpected that no one seemed to know how to respond. "You probably don't remember me," General Morrison continued as he approached, "but I remember you very clearly. 15 years ago, when I was Colonel Morrison, you cleaned the office where I was working on a classified project. Do you remember the late nights when you would come in to clean after everyone else had gone home?" Maria's mind raced backward through the years, searching for any memory that might connect to this moment. She remembered countless late nights, countless empty offices, countless forgotten encounters with military personnel who had barely acknowledged her presence. How could this general possibly remember her from such an insignificant interaction? "I'm not sure, sir," Maria said honestly. "I have cleaned many offices over the years." General Morrison smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his formal bearing into something more human and approachable. "Room 3B in the classified wing. I was working on a project that required me to stay late every night for 6 months. You would come in around midnight to empty the trash and clean the room." As he spoke, fragments of memory began to surface in Maria's mind. She did remember a colonel who worked impossibly late hours, always hunched over documents that he would quickly cover whenever she entered the room. She remembered how tired he always looked and how politely he would greet her during those midnight encounters. "You used to ask me if I needed coffee," General Morrison continued. "And when I said yes, you would bring me a fresh cup from the break room, even though it wasn't part of your job description. You probably saved my sanity during those months." The memory came flooding back with sudden clarity. The tired colonel who had worked on something important and secret, who had always treated her with kindness even during his most stressful moments. She remembered feeling sorry for him, working so late and alone, and how natural it had seemed to offer small gestures of human comfort like fresh coffee or an encouraging word. "You probably don't know this," General Morrison said, his voice carrying clearly through the still silent hallway. "But the project I was working on during those months became one of the most significant intelligence operations of the decade. The work I completed in that room, with your quiet support and kindness, helped save American lives and protect our national security." Maria felt the world shifting around her as she tried to process what she was hearing. The small kindnesses she had offered to a tired colonel, acts so insignificant that she had barely remembered them, had somehow contributed to something important and meaningful. "More than that," General Morrison continued, "your example taught me something crucial about leadership and service. Every night I watched you take pride in your work, treating every task with dignity and professionalism, even when no one was watching or acknowledging your efforts. You showed me what true service looks like." The general paused, and in that moment of silence, Maria became aware that every person in the hallway was hanging on his words. Officers who had never given her a second glance were now looking at her with expressions of curiosity and dawning respect. "Throughout my career," General Morrison said, "I've tried to remember the lesson you taught me about the importance of every person's contribution to our mission. The colonel who plans the operation, the sergeant who executes it, and the person who keeps the workspace clean and functional. We all serve the same cause, and we all matter equally." Maria felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. In all her years of feeling invisible and unimportant, she had never imagined that her simple acts of human decency had been noticed, much less valued and remembered. General Morrison took one more step forward, closing the distance between them. "Maria Santos," he said in a voice that carried the weight of absolute sincerity, "it is my honor to recognize your service to our country." And then, in a moment that defied every expectation and protocol Maria had ever understood about her place in the world, General Morrison came to attention and rendered her a full military salute. The ripple effect. The salute lasted only a few seconds, but in that brief moment Maria felt the weight of 15 years of invisibility lift from her shoulders. As General Morrison lowered his hand, the entire hallway remained frozen in stunned silence. No one had ever witnessed a four-star general saluting a member of the cleaning staff, and the unprecedented nature of the moment left everyone uncertain about how to respond. Maria stood motionless, her hands still gripping her cleaning cart, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. She had never received a salute in her life, had never imagined that such an honor could be bestowed upon someone like her. The gesture represented more than military protocol. It was recognition, respect, and validation of her worth as a human being. "Thank you for your service, Maria," General Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying a warmth that made the formal words feel deeply personal. "Your contributions to our mission have never been forgotten, and they never will be." As the general stepped back, something remarkable began to happen. Colonel Hayes, who had been standing closest to the scene, came to attention and rendered Maria a crisp salute. Then Major Williams followed suit. One by one, every officer in the hallway snapped to attention and saluted the cleaning lady who had suddenly become visible to them all. Maria watched in amazement as the formal procession transformed into an impromptu ceremony of recognition. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to comprehend what was happening. These were some of the most important military leaders in the country, and they were honoring her with the same respect they would show a fellow officer. When the last salute had been rendered, General Morrison spoke again, this time addressing the assembled personnel. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to remember this moment. Maria Santos represents the thousands of dedicated individuals who serve our mission in ways that often go unnoticed, but are absolutely essential to our success." He turned slightly to include Maria in his address. "Every person who contributes to our mission deserves our recognition and respect, regardless of their rank, position, or job description. We are all part of the same team, serving the same purpose, defending the same values." Mrs. Henderson, who had witnessed the entire scene from her position near the conference room, stepped forward with tears in her own eyes. For 15 years, she had supervised Maria's work, but had never fully understood the person behind the uniform. Seeing Maria through General Morrison's eyes had opened her own to the dignity and worth that had been there all along. "Maria," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. We all do. You've been serving alongside us for 15 years, and we've failed to acknowledge your contributions properly." General Morrison nodded approvingly. "Excellence in leadership means recognizing excellence wherever we find it. Maria, your dedication, professionalism, and service deserve to be celebrated not just today, but every day." As the formal recognition concluded, the assembled personnel began to disperse, but many stopped to speak with Maria personally. Officers who had passed her in the hallway for years without acknowledgement now approached to introduce themselves and thank her for her service. The transformation was immediate and profound. Sergeant Torres, who had always been kind to Maria, approached with a broad smile. "Senora Maria," he said in Spanish, "I always knew you were special, but now everyone else knows it too." His words brought fresh tears to Maria's eyes, but these were tears of joy and validation rather than sorrow. The news of what had happened spread throughout the building with remarkable speed. By the end of the day, Maria found herself approached by people she had never met, all wanting to express their appreciation for her years of dedicated service. The Invisible Woman had suddenly become the most visible person in the Pentagon. That evening, Maria called her daughter Rosa with a story that seemed too incredible to believe. "Mama," Rosa said, her voice filled with amazement and pride, "you've always been a hero to me, but now the whole world can see what I've always known about you." The impact of General Morrison's recognition extended far beyond that single day. Mrs. Henderson implemented new policies to ensure that all service personnel received proper acknowledgement for their contributions. Staff meetings began, including recognition of support staff, and the monthly newsletter started featuring profiles of employees from every level of the organization. Maria found that her daily experience at work had been fundamentally transformed. People who had never noticed her before now greeted her warmly in the hallways. Her opinions were sought on matters related to building operations and employee morale. She was invited to participate in meetings and committees where her perspective as a longtime employee was valued and respected. More importantly, Maria's own sense of self-worth underwent a profound transformation. The woman who had spent years making herself invisible began to stand taller, speak with more confidence, and engage more actively with her colleagues. She realized that her years of quiet service had indeed been meaningful and valuable, even when no one seemed to notice. The story of General Morrison's salute to Maria Santos became legendary within military circles. It was cited in leadership training programs as an example of recognizing the contributions of every team member. The general himself often spoke about the incident in his speeches, using Maria's example to illustrate the importance of valuing every person who contributes to the mission. 6 months after the incident, Maria received an unexpected phone call from the Pentagon's Human Resources Department. She was being offered a position as a supervisor in the Facilities Management Division with a significant increase in pay and responsibility. The promotion was a direct result of the recognition she had received and the leadership qualities that had become apparent once people began to see her clearly. Maria accepted the position, though she insisted on continuing some of her cleaning duties. "This work has dignity," she explained to her new colleagues. "I never want to forget that every job in this building matters and every person deserves respect." General Morrison attended Maria's promotion ceremony, where he spoke about the continuing importance of recognizing excellence at every level of service. "Maria Santos taught me that true leadership means seeing the worth in every individual and acknowledging their contributions to our common mission," he said. "Today, we celebrate not just her promotion, but her example of dedicated service." As Maria stood in her new office, looking out at the hallways she had cleaned for 15 years, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The Invisible Woman had become a leader, not through seeking recognition or advancement, but through the simple act of performing her duties with dignity, professionalism, and quiet excellence. Her daughter Rosa, now a registered nurse working at Walter Reed Medical Center, often brought her colleagues to visit Maria at the Pentagon. "This is my mother," Rosa would say with obvious pride. "The woman who taught me that how you do your work matters more than what work you do." The cleaning cart that had once been Maria's primary tool was now displayed in her office as a reminder of her journey. New employees would sometimes ask about it, and Maria would tell them the story of General Morrison's salute, emphasizing that recognition comes not from seeking attention, but from consistently doing your best work regardless of who is watching. Years later, when General Morrison retired, he requested that Maria be present at his ceremony. In his farewell address, he spoke about the many lessons he had learned during his distinguished career, but he gave special prominence to what he called the Maria Santos principle, the understanding that every person's contribution matters and deserves recognition. Leadership, he concluded, is not about commanding from above, but about recognizing the excellence that exists at every level of service. Maria Santos taught me that lesson 15 years ago in a midnight encounter over a cup of coffee, and it has guided my leadership philosophy ever since. Maria Santos retired from the Pentagon 5 years later, having transformed from an invisible cleaning lady into a respected leader and mentor. Her legacy lived on in the policies she had helped implement, the people she had mentored, and the countless individuals who had learned from her example that dignity and worth are not determined by job title or rank, but by the integrity and excellence with which we approach our work. The woman who had once been ignored by all had discovered that she had never really been invisible at all. She had always mattered. It just took a 4-star general's salute to help everyone else see what had been there all along.